By the way, if any of you are Kickstarter entrepreneurs, the quality of your idea has no bearing on whether or not you're going to raise money.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that because I felt bad about my first failure.
Don't feel bad. Just make it look like a ransom note and you'll be good. This was the piece that ended up putting abrasive on the map, right? The most striking finding, which has since been replicated by the Clayman Institute with a far larger data set, is the word abrasive showed up 17 times more in women's reviews than men's. The word aggressive showed up only twice in the men's reviews, with an urging to be more of it, as if it would be really great if you could bring more aggressive ambition to your deliverables, whereas the women's were like, hey, come on, stop being so aggressive. So pretty interesting. After we got started on Textio, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about job listings in a while because I'm very deep there now. I did a piece on resumes, which is sort of the flip side, right? A job post or performance review is sort of a manager first perspective on what is needed or what has been delivered. A resume is kind of our own perspective on who we are. So again, broad call for submissions on social media. At this point, I ran a company, so it's pretty easy to get a lot of resumes. Luckily, you got to use your strengths. And wanted to see whether men and women in technology with similar backgrounds chose to represent their own skills with some systematic differences or not. And this is particularly relevant because I don't know how much you know about hiring software, but most large enterprises use some sort of automation to filter the resumes that come in the door. The typical case is keyword search. It's very straightforward. But there's some people trying some more advanced techniques, including those highlighted and discovered here, which surprisingly enough favor male resumes. So found some really interesting. I got 1,100 resumes for this study from men and women who work in technology. And you kind of see the summary findings there on the right. The women's resumes are long, not quite twice as long, but close as the men's resumes. The men's resumes rely much more heavily on bulleted content, and the verbs that they use are far more concrete. So men are more likely to say, delivered 14% lift in click-through rate, designed and led implementation of new monetization platform. Very concrete. Women's resumes were much more likely to use expository prose. They may have contained very similar content, but the way it was presented, the women were much more likely to take a sentence or two and describe each job, whereas the men followed kind of the college resume class, bullet, 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 bullet. Bullets do a lot better in resume screening software, generally speaking. The men included much less in the way of personal attributes. So the women were much more likely to include awards that they had won, or highlight again those things that say, I'm really collaborative, I have a very creative style. They were much more likely to highlight personal attributes, whereas the men are like, I did this, I built that, hire me. They're very, very different. You can kind of see some of those numbers there. Women twice as likely to include an executive summary at the top that kind of tells their story. Women way more likely to include what I would call non-standard resume sections. So these kind of personal attributes are a great example at the end. So very interesting. And often would see, in some cases because it was a pretty large data set, people who had essentially the same role and level at the same company, very similar career trajectory, describing themselves with great difference. One of the things we'll talk about when we get to job listings is that a number of the patterns we saw and how men and women represented themselves in resumes bear out to how they respond to job listings. So I'll quickly use the example of bulleted content. It turns out that the optimal job post for engagement has about a third bulleted content. That's just a fact of the way job posts work. It's probably a visual silhouette thing, right? Your brain's sort of looking at it and saying, yep, that looks like a job listing versus looks like a story or like a verse list on the other end. When you go above 50% bulleted content in a job post, you dramatically reduce the number of women who apply for the job. And when you go below 25% bulleted content, you see a huge drop off in the number of men who apply for the job. So there's clearly a sweet spot because employers should want to get the broadest population possible. That's how you hire people most quickly, most qualified people. But it's very interesting to see that the way candidates that identify themselves as men or women, for example, respond to bullets, is very much reflected in how people that represent themselves as men or women present themselves in their resume. So kind of interesting. Started us seeing below. So all of this said, these are all documents that have, go back a minute, tease that finding. Resumes, job posts, performance reviews. These are pretty intense documents for in the workplace, right? There's clearly a relationship between an employee or a candidate and an employer, and we can together try to craft software or strategies that will help an employer be less biased, or help an employee be aware of how their documents are likely to be perceived. And, again, we're talking unconscious bias. Presumption here is good people who don't want to be biased, which most people are, right? Decided to take a look at Twitter because I had noticed, again, every good linguistic studies begins with narcissism. I had discovered, I tweet a lot. I tweet about a number of things. I tweet about natural language processing, machine learning, and technology. I tweet a lot about the business of technology because I have a company. I tweet a lot about gender and diversity. I tweet about my kid. I tweet about astronomy. I tweet about a lot of things. But I noticed over a few month period that anytime I tweeted about gender or diversity, it got significantly more engagement than any of my tweets on other topics. And while it's possible I'm just very boring on the other topics, I wondered whether there was something interesting in that. And so over an 8-week period, I identified 100 pretty prominent, more prominent than me, men and women in technology with large follower counts and steady Twitter activity. So 3 novel tweets a day and at least 3,000 followers was the cutoff that I applied. And wanted to see for original Twitter content by this group of people, again, all in technology, tried to focus on people who were going to tweet about both tech itself or the business of tech and some social justice issue, often diversity in some way, but not always diversity because I had to expand it to get enough men to include in the study. There were probably a disproportionate representation of people of color in my data set compared to what's normal in tech companies as per their diversity numbers, because I was interested in whether that would make a difference to the patterns that I was seeing of Twitter engagement. Not super surprising findings. It turns out maybe it wasn't just me. The men and women, and by the way, the results here are orthogonal to follower count. I controlled for follower count, so that did not drive the difference here. Men tweet a lot more often than women when they, in this study. When they tweet on any topic, it's significantly more likely to get engagement. I measured engagement by favorites and tweets because it was pretty easy to query for. Men on any topic get about twice as many favorites and 3 times as many retweets as women. When you focus on the men's and the women's tweets about technology, that gap widens even further. So the men got about 3 times as many favorites as women, in technology space, not 2 times, and 7 times as many retweets as the women. I will say there was one woman in the entire study who was an exception to this, and it was Kara Swisher. So if we all have to be Kara Swisher, it kind of shows the state of the situation. If you know Kara Swisher, she's the brains behind Recode with Wallmaster. So major media presence. Yeah.
What type of Twitter attributes tell you that there's a female or a male?
I had to manually code those.
Oh.
I had to manually code those, and and as it happens, I know many people involved, so that was manageable. Okay. And there were a few that I didn't include because I couldn't tell. They haven't put their identities forward, and I try not to infer. I try to only read what identity kind of is brought forward by the individual. The exception, though, were when women tweeted about diversity, which they did a lot more often. Curiously, half of the overall tweets about diversity from men came from the 17 men of color out of the 100 in the study. So they did talk about diversity in some form a lot more. When women tweeted about diversity, their diversity tweets did get higher engagement than the men's diversity tweets. It was about 2x for both favorites and retweets, which placed their diversity tweets slightly below the men's average on all topics, right? So I thought this was interesting and actually pretty alarming because as someone who cares both about technology and about gender and race within technology, I could see on Twitter the way the community is shaped out that you had almost non-overlapping conversations. You had a group of people having a conversation about technology, machine learning or drones or VR, whatever, about technology. And then you had a group of people having conversations about diversity and technology. And it's not awesome if those groups don't overlap. It means that you never provide a way for them to converge, which is actually really important for both product and engineering development in the industry and for the improvement of diversity within the industry. So it wasn't a win. It's kind of interesting. So kind of brings us a little bit towards Textio. We'll talk a little bit about that and how we build it. Anyone who has spent any time talking to diversity and inclusion leads or HR leaders will hear at some point, listen, we've got it covered. We've done an unconscious bias training, and it's all good. All good. It's sadly not very good. There's no data right now that any unconscious bias trainings do anything to improve representation or retention or hiring within a team. In fact, there's some evidence that maybe it diminishes those things by calling people's attention to bias that they maybe didn't know they were carrying. And they're like, that's pretty logical. But it's actually a really pernicious thing, right? The best case of sort of checklists, like don't say rock star in your job listings, don't say ninja in your job listings, sort of checklists, is that maybe they're good conversation starters. That's sort of the best case. It gets you thinking a little bit about the words that you use. Fairly limited in scope. The worst case, which happens all the time, is it creates this sort of false sense of security that you've actually addressed the problem as you call the training. Or worse, have like some online webinar thing that people skip through on the computer. Software is kind of what we create, I think has a real advantage in bias interruption because it can be systemic and adaptive and really change your habits. So Textio's whole vision is, if I'm giving you feedback as you're writing, then I can help you avoid making a mistake before you publish something out into the world. Again, unconscious bias, assuming those people are good people who would actually like to eradicate bias from their communication. So there's no quick fixes. I want to talk a little bit about what everyone wants the quick fix. They want to press the button or keep a workshop, hire a diversity lead, but it doesn't work. So how did we get started on this with Textio? So we began early in the lifetime of the company collecting a very large corpus of job posts. And not only the job posts, but performance outcomes for each job. So could be very simple things like how many people applied, was it popular or not? How long did it take to fill? Was it done in a week or did it take a year to hire the role? But also in many cases narrower outcomes too, like, well, of the people who applied, how many were good enough to get through a screening interview? Were they qualified or not? How many got through that on-site interview? How many took your offer? And at each stage, what was the demographic mix of people that got through different steps in the funnel? And a surprising number of companies collect this and have been willing to share it. So early on, when we first got started as kind of a scrappy AI company who didn't have any proprietary data, but we did have a really good set of relationships with these HR leaders because of work that the last work I just showed you, the work I published. we were able to collect a pretty good early scrappy data set from a few customers who were interested. We gave them a free prototype to play with. And one of them came back and was like, this feels really good, what you're showing me, based on my 20 years of experience in talent acquisition. You could do a lot better if I just gave you like our last 5 years of hiring data. Yeah, that's like a Fortune 100 company, 5 years worth of hiring data is like 100,000 people. Like, yes, I can work with that. So it actually is now part of how we work with customers, right? When customers give us large sets of their outcome data, they actually pay us less, and it's resulted in getting a really good thing. So let me show you how it works, and then we'll talk about it. So this is Textio. You can try it on our site for free for a couple weeks if you're interested, so you can play with it and see how your favorite companies or perhaps your own jobs stack up. But I've gone ahead for this, since we're on Amazon's campus more or less, I went ahead and picked an Amazon job here to show you, software development engineer. I will say that I